Welcome, everyone, to the third day of Latina Action Day. We made it. We're at the finish line, and we're so grateful for all of you that have been with us for the last 3 days, and for all of you that are joining us for today for the special conversation around COVID-19 and the economy. So specifically, our response in how to ensure a strong workforce and in this current economic standpoint. I'd like to also ensure that you are well aware of our goal for Latina Action Day. Since we couldn't get all together and in Sacramento, we wanted to ensure that we provided a format in which Latinas' voices were being heard, and that you heard from our elected officials, appointed officials, and key decision makers as we move forward. Today, as we address an issue that's top of mind for everyone, not just here in California, but around the world, and we work towards a path towards our economies and workforce to ensure a strong economy and workforce during this pandemic. We're really proud to be joined by key members of the Governor's Business and Jobs Recovery Task Force and legislators to discuss California's recovery, with a focus on strategies to support homeowners, renters, small business owners, and workers during these difficult times. We'd also like to thank the sponsors that stuck with us. Specifically, today's session was sponsored by Marathon Petroleum Corporation for sponsoring this extremely important conversation. And thank you again to all the wonderful panelists who are joining us today. It is with great pleasure that I welcome my fellow Puerto Rican sister and dear friend who has been helping us really organize Latina Action Day with the incredible HOPE team. I want to make sure everyone knows how incredible the team is. But I'm glad to introduce and very proud to introduce Zelinda Vasquez, the chair of Latina Action Day and the Chief External Affairs Officer for Planned Parenthood. She is an honorary HOPE Leadership Institute alum member, which a lot of the women you'll be hearing from today either have been an honorary alum member, a member of the HOPE Leadership Institute, or a binational fellowship. So we're very proud. And to, of course, everyone that participates is an honorary Latina. So Zelinda, take it away.
Thank you, Helen. It's so great to conclude these last 3 days with you and all of the participants. I'm so inspired, continuously inspired by the caliber of information that we receive. And on today's topic, it's such a relevant topic, and these times are unprecedented. So the information that we're receiving today to conclude the program is really going to be helpful for us as we continue to navigate this crisis that we're in. These last 2 days and today are meant to equip all of the participants with information that will motivate you to continue to engage, to continue to research on topics, and to continue to become the change we want to see in the world, and to take action. We are going to continue to solve the challenges we have in our community. We are leaders, and we know that we will never give up hope. I want to thank you, Helen, for your fierce leadership and commitment and passion to empowering Latinas, and in particular right now, when we sometimes are faced with so many challenges. So thank you, Helen, for your fierce commitment and your passion and your friendship. I also really want to thank the HOPE team, the staff team. They are incredible. I've always known that. And this working Latina Action Days has really allowed me the opportunity to learn more about them and just, how incredibly committed they are. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank the sponsors for continuously supporting HOPE and for continuing to invest in the future of Latina. So before we introduce our panel, I'm honored to introduce Senator Lena Gonzalez. And she's a very special guest, sometime supporter of HOPE. She's also an alum, a 2013 alum of the Leadership Institute, the HLI Institute. She was elected actually just last year to the state Senate, and it probably seems like 10 years since it's just been a year, and there's been so many issues and so many things that you've worked on and really have led in just 1 year. But before that, Senator Lena Gonzalez served on the Long Beach City Council for a few years. And so She has been an unelected official leader for quite some time. She is now the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement, and we especially are looking forward to having her talk today about her other special chairwoman role as the pandemic on emergency response. So welcome, Senator Lena Gonzalez. It's great to have you, and thank you for all of the work that you're doing right now.
Thank you so much, Celinda. Thank you to Helen and all of our the HOPE staff and all of the panelists that are here, many of my colleagues, and everyone for listening. It's been a very interesting time this last year, but I will tell you, I'm first and foremost very proud to be a HOPE HLI alumna. I certainly don't think I would be in the state Senate if it were not for HOPE. Now I'm one of 5 Latina senators, and hopefully we have more Latina senators coming into the mix, which would be great. And I proudly represent Long Beach and Southeast Los Angeles in California. I know today and the last few months and weeks have been very trying for many people, especially the Latino community, as we're really trying to look forward to the opportunities ahead. But we know that as at this time, we have a state budget that we have to pass on the 15th. I know you'll learn more about that. And we also have a lot of uncertainty as well. We have about a $54 billion budget deficit that we're trying to close, and we're really trying to work innovatively, both the Senate and the Assembly, coming together with the governor's office to ensure that we are protecting those that are most vulnerable, ensuring that there are not additional deep cuts to our health and safety services, as well as looking forward ahead to the issues that are very important to many of us to get our economy back up and running, which is education as well. Just a few different points that I wanted to make before we get started here with your panelists, because you have a lot of strong Latina women that you are going to hear from, and just women in leadership roles in the state of California. As mentioned, the Senate and the Assembly worked together during this moment to delay any cuts until later this year, as we realize our true revenue here in the state of California. And pushing again to ensure that there aren't deep cuts, as I mentioned, to health services and education and much more. The governor actually enacted a statewide task force on business and jobs recovery, bringing all stakeholders together, which was a really good first step in order to bring the minds together to really start discussing what our state will look like in the coming years. And the Senate Democrats actually provided a proposal a few weeks back, a $25 billion economic stimulus plan in the form of tax credits between the landlord and tenant relationship, in order to stimulate our economy and get us back up and running after this is done. For me personally, I've been working on a few bills. I condensed my bill package quite significantly given the pandemic, but with good purpose. I'm working on a few bills, one of which is SB 939, which is addressing commercial evictions and ensuring that small businesses, restaurants, bars, those that were asked and directed to get offline by the governor and the state legislature first, that they had protections under this bill. In addition, working on a broadband for all plan to ensure that every California student and small business has access, whether you're in rural California or you're in urban California where I represent, having access and opportunities for technology and high speeds is of utmost importance to us. And then lastly, the Senate Special Committee on Pandemic Emergency Response had its second meeting this week, looking at testing capacity to get our economy back up and running. We're now at 50 to 60,000 tests per day, which is phenomenal. And I know the governor had that as a priority. And then this week we looked at skilled nursing facilities. As we know, those are the hot spots when it comes to this pandemic. And so we're working hard. We're going to continue to have really important issues on this committee, and we look forward to your work together to ensure, again, that we get our economy up and running. But lastly, I just want to thank everyone again for their participation on this panel. Know that my office is here to support even during these trying times. And I thank HOPE and all of the members of the HOPE leadership program for being right there on the front lines with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's wonderful to be able to address you as Senator. You have done so much for our community, and we're very proud of all the work that you do, and you know you always have our support. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to get ready for our panel. As we prepare, I am very thrilled and honored to introduce our next speaker, a dear friend, someone that has been a key supporter of the organization since I've been executive director and even before, and that's the incredible Nicole Parra. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. Good morning. As you all know, Nicole is a State and Government Affairs Manager for Marathon Petroleum Corporation and a fellow member of the Hope Leadership Institute class of 1999. She has more than 25 years of extensive legislative and political experience in Washington, D.C. and in California, having served as a legislative assistant to U.S. Congressman Cal Dooley, elected to the California State Assembly, and was also appointed to a high-level position within the California executive branch under Governor Schwarzenegger. We welcome Nicole, and a fun fact about Nicole is that she was our first Hope Leadership Institute member to win an assembly seat. So we're very proud of her and her consistent contributions to our state, and thank you so much for your leadership, Nicole.
Well, thank you. Good morning. It's a wonderful and an honor to be here to be able to speak on behalf of the company I work for, Marathon Petroleum Corporation. And I want to acknowledge my boss, who's also on the Zoom today, Steve Koenig. He handles all the West Coast government affairs for our company. And let me tell you something about Steve. Before I joined Marathon Petroleum, which we are the largest domestic refiner of transportation fuels. So the jet fuel that you all use when you fly in your planes or drive, and you might be familiar with our retail brand. We own the Arco brand. Marathon Petroleum through Steve Koenig and some folks before, and Brisa, who now works for Valero, have been heavily involved with Hope before I even came. So it was wonderful to be part of a company that employs thousands of people here in California. We have our two big refineries in Northern and Southern California. And one of the projects that I was really pleased to work on was when Arco and our company, after the energy reform in Mexico, we were the first company to go into the northern area and open our Arco stations. We have close to 300 Arco stations in Mexico, and it was an honor. Steve and I went down. We helped set up our Mexico City office. We worked with the local community, and even during this COVID-19, our team in Mexico has been able to provide protective equipment to many of the communities there, especially in Tijuana and where we do our work. In addition, our company also provided during this time 500,000 PPEs to local hospitals throughout California, in addition to the numerous investments. And I heard Henry Perea talk a little bit, who works for Chevron. We all work together as oil and energy companies, and we all are very proud of the corporate values that our company has. For us, health and safety, environmental stewardship, integrity, corporate citizenship, and diversity inclusion. And for someone who spent 20 plus years working on behalf of government as an elected official, a staff member, I wanted to work for a company when I joined the corporate world that would have the same values and passion to allow me to continue the work in the community, continue to work on legislation with, whether it's Senator Lena Gonzalez or working with Assemblymember Limon, to be able to say, go into their offices and talk about what we're doing in the community, to have those conversations and know my company not only has the support in the communities we're honored to operate in, but also its employees. And so any of you who are thinking about going into the corporate world, I highly encourage you to make sure that you work for a company that shares your values and allows you to be who you are. Because I'm from Bakersfield, California, the Central Valley. I was in the first class of HLI. When I was a member, I made sure that the young women in Fresno, Tulare, Kings, and Kern County had the opportunity. I sponsored lunches when they would come up during Latina Action Day. I helped found Latina Leaders of Kern County. So for me and the hope and the relationships, it's been very important to continue to be involved in organizations that support women advocate for our undocumented community, our documented community. And as we're talking here today, and you'll hear from one of my best friends, Elaine Trevino, on the panel, what is hope? What are we looking at as we enter this new, post-COVID, but also as our economy transition, what does that workforce look like? I also was able to, when I was working for the federal government, we looked at some of these strategic partnerships. We helped create the Federal Empowerment Zone in the Central Valley to try to get state agencies working through the California Partnership to do the things that we need to do to lift everyone. My father always taught me that the best social policy is having a job, right? And then survival issues, having a good job, healthcare, and a roof over your head is so important. So I'm going to wrap up. I want to say that thank you to the panelists, thank you to the elected officials, thank you, again, to the sponsors during this time. Marathon Petroleum, through, again, Steve, we wanted to make sure that we were here to make sure that Latina Action Day happened. And Helen, one thing, every morning I wake up and I see hope. And you might think, what is she talking about? Well, when you're an OG, you get one of these. You get one of these, hope, because every day that I wake up, I think about hope, and I think about my sisters, and I think about all the wonderful things that Helen, Belinda, and the crew are doing every day to advocate on behalf of Latinas. So Helen?
Thank you, Nikki. I love
Hats
that
off.
you're wearing the Hope hat. That's perfect. And thank you for your passion for our community and your ongoing support of all the Hope Leadership Institute women and women across the state. So thank you very much. And a big thank you to Steve. I know, Steve, you've tuned in. I think you know how grateful we are for your consistent support in every level that you've been through, every company you've been there for the organization. We're very grateful for that. So thank you both, Nicole and Steve. Now we get to start turning towards our panel. Before we do go to the panel, since Nicole was talking a bit about energy, I want to also remind everyone that we have an energy tool policy kit that you can download on the Hope website, www.latinas.org. Go learn there about policy, energy policy, and how you can have an active role and hopefully apply to some commissions so that you can be representative of your community when it comes to energy and water issues. So keep that in mind, the energy policy toolkit that's on www.latinas.org. So now it's my pleasure, as we start the morning with off of our panelists, to introduce one of our other key sponsors and supporters of not only this conference, but also our Hope Leadership Institute, and that is Comcast, Universal, and Telemundo. And we are joined by an incredible individual who has been leading the way in journalism for quite a while now. So I'm very happy to say that Dunia Elvir is here to and she's the anchor of Telemundo's 52's weekday, midday, and early evening newscasts. Dunia is an award-winning journalist with more than 2 decades of successful career in journalism. She's also an important fun fact about Dunia, and you're in good hands because this woman can multitask like nobody else. She is a mother of 8 children. So I'll let that all sink in. But welcome, Dunia, and thank you again, Telemundo, for your support. And Dunia will be the moderator for our upcoming panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a wonderful day to, talk about California economic and workforce recovery. Everybody that is tuning right now, I want you to know that you're going to hear from key members of the governor's task force and legislators discuss California's economic recovery. Before I go into the topic with our wonderful panelists, I want to remind you that you can type in the chat box what city and organization you're representing and submit your questions via the Q&A function. We will try to respond to all of them. In order to be able to respond more questions, my request to the panelists will be each answer, let's keep it to 1 to 2 minutes max so we can be able to give them as much information as they need. And this discussion mainly will focus on strategies to support homeowners, renters, small business owners, and workers during these difficult times. COVID-19 came to change our lives, and it's fair to say that a lot of people are afraid, and fear paralyzes humans naturally. So we're here to help them, and like I said, our panelists not only are powerful, women, but they're also very informed, and they're going to help you with all of these questions. I'm going to start introducing Lourdes Castro Ramirez. She's the Secretary of Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency. She's also HLI 99 Task Force Board Chair. She oversees departments responsible for funding affordable housing, protecting California's civil rights, monitoring banking and financial transactions, strengthening consumer protections, and licensing 3 million professionals and businesses. So start thinking the questions you can ask Lourdes, because she shares the state's Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, which has awarded more than $1.2 billion in assisting to homeless services providers and serves on the CALFA board. Thank you for being here, Lourdes. And now I'm going to introduce Julie Su. She's the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development Agency. Governor Newsom appointed her in January 2019. Secretary Su oversees the state departments and boards that enforce labor law, including minimum wage and occupational safety standards, provide state disability and unemployment insurance benefits, fund workforce training and apprenticeship programs. She also combats wage theft, protect injured workers, and arbitrates public sector contract disputes. And she speaks Mandarin and Spanish. So if you want to send me some questions in Spanish, I'll be able to read them to her, and she'll be able to answer those too. Thank you for being here. I want to also welcome Elaine Trevino, Governor Newsom's task force member. She's the president of the Almond Alliance of California, a member-based trade association that advocates on regulatory and issues in areas of international trade, food safety, air quality, water, crop protection, worker safety, and feed quality. Elaine works to educate about the importance of agriculture and the critical workforce to the California national and world economy. She was born and raised in Central Valley of California, so you can see how close this is to her heart, because she's breathing this every day, and she's very concerned about the well-being of our culture community. She's a mother of two, and anything you want to know about basketball, I'm assuming she's the expert, so I'm going to have questions for her later on in that regards. And I want to welcome to Assemblymember Monique Limon. She is chair of the Assembly Committee on Banking and Finance. She passed landmark legislations to protect consumers from high interest loans as the chair of the Select Committee on the nonprofit sector. She has authored legislation to assist nonprofits in applying for state grant money and brought awareness to the impact nonprofits make on our economy. Is very important, because when we think about inner cities, when we think about kids like me who grew up in Watts, nonprofits like this are the ones that help us reach our goals. So Monique is also a binational fellow of Hope, and she is as a vice president of the bicameral and bipartisan California Legislative Women's Caucus. She has championed causes for women and working families across California, ensuring access to paid family leave and early childhood education. Welcome, all of you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. And we're going to start with the questions, because I think, everybody wants to know what's going to be California's economic and workforce recovery path. I'm going to start with the first question, and this is going to be for Secretary Castro. I want you to speak from the housing point of view. We have seen that COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on our workforce and economy. What are some of the largest impacts that you are seeing as a result of this pandemic?
Thank you, Dunia, and I just want to take an opportunity to again acknowledge the great work and leadership of Helen Torres and of course the entire HOPE organization. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this. I very much appreciate that the first question is centered around housing, Dunia, because I think it's really important that we not forget that in order for us to be able to have a strong economic recovery, we need to focus on housing. housing is fundamental to everything that we do. Housing enables us to really become who we are going to become. Housing stability is important for children. Having safe, affordable housing also enables us to be more productive at work. And so from an economic recovery perspective, I will share that before we entered this COVID-19 pandemic, as a state, housing affordability and homelessness was already a crisis, was already a very challenging issues. And I'll share a few statistics to help understand the magnitude of what we were facing pre-COVID-19 and how important it is that we continue to focus on it as we go into the economic recovery phase. First, in California, too many families are paying too much of their income for rent. When we look at, we have 40 million people in California. 3 million households are paying more than 30% of their income. In housing speak, we call this that these are households that are cost burdened, that are spending more than 30% of their income, which is a federal standard. But the deeper we look at this question or at these numbers, we also find that 1/3 of those 3 million are paying more than 50% of their income. So they're having to spend more of their income towards keeping their home. The other statistic is that fewer families are able to attain homeownership. And so we've been seeing a drop in homeownership. And then finally, California has a disproportionate share of individuals experiencing homelessness. Last year's point-in-time count, which is a number that we track to determine how many individuals are living on the street on any given night, showed that we had over 151,000 individuals. So those indicators are not acceptable. And our Governor Newsom, and his entire administration, we've been laser focused on expanding housing affordability options. We've been laser focused on coming up with comprehensive solutions to address homelessness. And so as we go into the economic recovery phase, it will be critical that we continue to be working closely with local communities, investing dollars, and moving forward with some of the best practices that we know work. And those are around protecting renters and homeowners, preserving housing affordability, producing more housing, and then again, working across systems to end homelessness. And hopefully I'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the strategies, but it is a #1 commitment and priority.
Thank you very much. We have the same question for the rest of the panelists. I would like to go with Secretary Sue. If you can give us an answer from a economy and workforce point of view.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I just wanted to echo everything that my fellow cabinet member and sister, Secretary Castro Ramirez said. And thank you all for having me. I am really honored to be an honorary Latina today. People sometimes ask, why I work so hard and why I'm so committed to trying to make the world better from wherever I happen to be. And a lot of it is that I've surrounded myself with incredible Latinas throughout my life who inspire me and are always doing just that little bit more. So thank you for having me. I'm going to echo a lot of comments of Secretary Lourdes Ramirez and look at it from the workforce standpoint. So the pandemic really revealed fractures in our society, and it not only required a public health response that focused on the most vulnerable Californians, but we now have to have an economic recovery response that does the same thing. As Labor Secretary, my job has really been to support the governor and the administration in 3 interrelated ways in this pandemic. The first is to meet the unprecedented demand for unemployment insurance and other types of benefits for Californians who've been unemployed. We have had over 5 million unemployment insurance and pandemic unemployment assistance claims filed since March 12th. Over 5 million. To put that in perspective, in the last recession, at the peak in 2008, in a 2-month period, the high was 700,000. So we're at magnitudes above anything that we've ever seen before. We've also paid out over $29 billion in benefits. So, and there's lots of Californians who are still waiting for their benefits. The second way is to ensure that Californians who are still working experience a safe and healthy workplace. And this has been a challenge, right? For many of the most vulnerable workers, that is a challenge that existed before the pandemic. And then you put a public health emergency on top of that, and you realize that so many workers, especially our most vulnerable workers, workplaces that have high numbers of Latino and Latina workers are really especially vulnerable. And so we have been putting out industry-specific guidance on how to keep workers safe. I so appreciate the earlier comments about PPE, personal protective equipment. That has been certainly a challenge, and we've got a much better handle now on that. But worker health and safety is just so key, and so much of our guidance is requiring businesses, and all of you who are business owners know this, to work very differently, right? The transition to how do you keep people 6 feet apart? How do you ensure that when you have work teams and work lines and work shifts that you may need to change those dramatically to ensure the physical distancing that is necessary. I think Elaine is on here. I'll say, I'm sure she knows this, right? It's just looking at agriculture, right? For farm workers, how do you stagger crews? How do you stagger break and lunch times? How do you, reduce work shifts or increase shifts so that people don't have to be there at the same time? There's all kinds of competing and challenging ways to meet the new, the reopening conditions to ensure that we don't end with a re-spike in the pandemic. And the third one, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, is just to really focus on how we rapidly reemploy Californians into quality jobs. I already got this question, right? Will California's economic losses disproportionately affect low and middle income Californians? I think if we are not intentional and deliberate about the opposite, then the answer to that will be yes. That's the way our economy has been structured. And so we're very, very committed as the governor, all of us who work with him, as well as state government, working collaboratively and proactively and creatively to making sure that does not happen.
Thank you very much, Secretary Sue. And that question you read was from Vanessa Hernandez. Thank you for sending her question. I want to ask also Assemblymember Monique Limon, what are some of the largest impact that you're seeing as a result of this pandemic?
Thank you. So, I appreciate the comment with the comments from both of our wonderful secretaries overseeing housing and consumer protections, but also labor. We've been in touch with them as a legislature. These issues that they've mentioned, as a representative, in the Assembly, we represent nearly 500,000 people. State senators represent about 1 million people. So what we hear is the direct impact of what this all looks like. We take the phone calls and the emails of desperation on a lot of these issues. Housing and homelessness were issues prior to the pandemic, will continue to be an issue during the pandemic and after the pandemic. The cost of housing, I'm a member of the Housing Committee in the California Assembly, and we've been trying to tackle this issue for a very long time. And now, rents and mortgages are probably the top thing that I'm hearing about. What happens when you've been impacted financially? How do you pay your rent? How do you pay your mortgage? That's something that we've been hearing in a very clear way. I think certainly unemployment is probably the #1 issue that I hear from constituents. We are working with over 300 individual cases right now in my district of people who are trying to figure out the system, trying to make sure that they can get in, to make sure that they receive their unemployment. And so that's something that I know that Secretary Sue has been working on a whole lot. And you have to remember that our state went from an average, and I'm sure the Secretary can correct me, but an average of about 7,000 in February of 2020 claims for unemployment to over 3.4 million now. This is huge. This is huge. Our system took a huge change really in a matter of weeks. And I think that that's what we're seeing come from constituents. The health issues continue to be there. People, I think, have a lot of feelings about whether or not the stay-at-home orders are working, what we should be doing. I represent 2 different counties, and I can tell you that while similar in their approach, they are not identical. And so there's a lot of comparison from county to county. I represent Ventura and Santa Barbara County, and we are seeing that there's different approaches to how each county does it. The size of the county matters. The geography of the county matters. What I see in my rural areas that I represent are very different than my urban areas. The city of Guadalupe is very different than the city of Oxnard, right? And so how all of this is played out in the counties is very important. Additionally, I would say schools continue to be a big issue. What is education going to look like for our students? What we know is that we cannot have an economy that recovers, an economy that reopens, an economy that's stimulated without parents being able to get back to work. And that means kids are going to have to go to school. But what does that look like? It's not going to look like what we are used to seeing. And so all of these issues come to us as elected officials, and we work with the governor, his departments, our secretaries in these specialized areas to try to tackle these problems. A lot of the bills that the legislature is moving forward are related to these areas. The legislature has made an effort to really focus on legislation this year that is needed to address these immediate impacts. I know that I'm working, on mortgages, on forbearance. I'm trying to understand how we give people more time to pay off debt, because we have no idea how long this emergency is going to last. We don't know if there will be a second wave. There's a whole lot of educated predictions that are happening right now, and all of that matters. In this moment right now, I can tell you that California not only has a health crisis, we have an economic crisis and also a social crisis. I want to recognize that what we have felt in the last 2 to 3 weeks related to race issues, related to what we're seeing around the criminal justice system is very real. I don't have the luxury as a state representative to separate all of these issues and say, I'm going to deal with this month and deal with that next month. We have got to deal with all of it at the same time, and this is real for all of us. So all of these things absolutely matter, but I also think that we have to recognize that in the last recession, California was one of the states that came out faster from the recession in a stronger way. It was not easy, and I believe that that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to move in a path that will get us to an outcome. Now, when we say that outcome is something that will help individuals, will have the economy back up and running, will be healthy again, it's not all within the state's control, though. We continue to look for a vaccine that is effective, a vaccine that's safe for individuals, and so there's a lot of elements that are important to our recovery. I think you will see this. I think Californians will see a different California than the California we knew February 2020 for probably the next 2 to 3 years. But we are working collaboratively to try to address the many issues that people are expressing are happening to them at the same time.
Thank you, Assembly Member. You're saying California is the first one that recovered last time. I'm going to say something from a female point of view, because in California, 50.2% are females, so we're stronger. We go and we take care of our kids, we take care of the jobs, we take care of our communities. And with that, the same question I want to extend it to also, let me see, I got lost here a little bit with Elaine. Elaine, I want you to touch on this topic as well, but let me understand a little bit more from our people that are working in agriculture. In the Central Valley, we have big communities that, after talking about how impacted we are, this community specifically get even more impacted with this situation.
Absolutely. I think, well, first of all, thank you to Hope and to the amazing women on this panel, with Secretary Castro Ramirez, Secretary Sue, and Member Limon. These women put in long hours, and I'm amazed at the work that they all do. The administration has been working so hard. and to look so good. So kudos to you. I know you guys all put in such tremendous hours. I do want to speak to agriculture because I think that while education was touched upon, agriculture is essential infrastructure. Day one, it was defined as essential infrastructure. And what I'm amazed is, I sit in my office and I do my Zoom calls, and for my school-age children, I pray to God they're not going to bust in the door behind me, but I'm able to work from home and make it work. But these folks who work in agriculture, they don't have that luxury, and childcare from day one has been a problem. Just from the standpoint of, for young children, not having childcare but having to work because you are part of the essential infrastructure has been extremely challenging. I think having sufficient food, many of the working poor rely on the schools to provide meals for their children. And that continues, to be a challenge to make sure that children are receiving healthy breakfast, lunch, and now, dinner is so critical, especially for the long hours. Secretary Sue mentioned, that there's protections in place, and I think the state has done an exceptional job of providing guidance, especially since you're conflicting with federal guidance and then local guidance. And so sometimes it can be confusing for employers on which set of guidance is to use. But overall, the personal protection is key. In the cases for smaller employers, it's been challenging to get sufficient PPE, but I think we're seeing that work out now. That was initiated by the administration, and we're seeing Office of Emergency Services be much more active and communicate with the regional representatives. So that's been very important. But I also want to speak to education and the digital divide. There's rural communities that when we're talking about online education, forget not having computers, not having broadband. And so you really have to go back to the basics of how are we going to deliver some of these services long term, especially when you see school districts sending out surveys of, are we going to be an provide online education when some of these communities just don't have access to it. So basic things like that with working with the rural communities has been challenging. And then testing, not having sufficient proximity to test sites. And so as Assemblymember Limon mentioned, wondering about what's next in terms of the wave and making sure that we have sufficient testing. That is all so critical. When you look at the department, I saw somebody was here from the California Department of Healthcare, and you look at their latest numbers of 55.6% cases are Latino. And that's concerning. And we haven't broken it down to rural communities, but wanting to make sure that the agricultural workforce that feeds this state, the nation, and the world is supported is critical. And so that's something we continue to work with the administration and continue to highlight.
We are getting questions coming in, and this one gets my attention, so I'm going to read it. It says, COVID-19 had an impact on domestic violence and abuse, as well as human trafficking, labor trafficking in the agriculture industry especially. Santa Barbara, Fresno, and LA are cities with high trafficking activity. What type of assistance is going towards addressing or understanding these issues and effects of COVID-19? Is there some assistance going directly to nonprofits, giving immediate frontline help? And let's start with you, since you're on the frame, Elaine, to answer this. Let's keep it to a minute so we can go with all the questions.
I'm not aware of funds that are being given directly to nonprofits, but it's something that I'd be happy to look into, as well as I'm sure the rest of the panel. I can tell you that law enforcement is very aware of those increased domestic abuse and violence numbers. I have to say it was early on in COVID that you just saw with dysfunctional situations, people being at home, you're likely to see more of that occur. And so I know while local law enforcement we've had dialogue about these situations, but I cannot speak specifically to the resources available, but I'd be willing to help look and identify resources either through the state or through the feds to see if there's anything directly available to nonprofits. But it is a real issue.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. Any of the panelists that knows about any type of resources, maybe Assemblymember Limon?
Sure, and you know, I represent Santa Barbara, so this is an issue that's you know, near and dear to a lot of us. I will tell you, the California Legislative Women's Caucus has been pushing very hard. The domestic violence issue has happened all over the state. We have seen an increase with COVID-19, not a 1-2% increase. Some areas have seen up to 28% increase in the number of concerns that have come in. And that's a lot, again, over a matter of 8 to 12 weeks, right? We've seen this increase. And certainly we're working with our district attorneys and law enforcement on what to do. Here's going to be the tough thing for the rest of this year and the 2020-2021 year, that a lot of the state's perspective, and I think we heard the Senator Gonzalez talk about this, is that we're trying to keep the funds we have in place. We have a $54 billion deficit. So there's not a lot of places in the budget where we're seeing increases in funding. We are trying to make sure we don't see cuts in funding. And so our budget is going to reflect more the conversations along how do we not cut these services. What we're specifically doing for nonprofits and working with the California Nonprofit Association is asking for flexibility and how to use state funds. In a time of crisis, when you don't see more money coming in, we are trying to ensure that nonprofits have flexibility in ways they can use the funds. That is one tool out of many tools to be able to address the crisis.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question I have here. You guys know that Latina-owned businesses are the fastest growing in the state, increasing by 111% in the last decade. 80% of Latina-owned businesses are micro businesses, sole owners with no employees, and annual revenues less than $50,000. The impact of COVID-19 has been particularly devastating for California's small businesses. We see it here. We report it every week on these small businesses. So my question is, what are some resources for impacted small business owners? And let's start with Secretary Sue.
So I will say that I mentioned this earlier, and I really appreciate the Assembly member saying this too, which is that there's been tremendous collaboration and cooperation across the administration during these really difficult times. So one of the partners in the administration is GoBiz. And GoBiz, their focus is on small business, and their small business resources are headed by another amazing Latina, Isabel Guzman. And so the state has a small business center that can provide assistance and has been providing assistance around things like, federal programs that, it wasn't a very smooth rollout of how those loans were given. And so California really focused some resources there. I'll also just note that this is in the governor's proposed budget, but Assemblymember Limon is absolutely right. The entire budget is filled with really difficult cuts, which is particularly hard for those of us who helped to think about the budget back in January, where we were in a very, very different place. And so, but one of the proposals that is still in the budget is a $10 million, what's called the SEED program. It stands for Social Entrepreneurs for Economic Development. And the purpose of that is to address exactly what you're saying, Dunia, which is they are micro loans and technical assistance for small businesses, especially those who otherwise face barriers in the economy and barriers to employment. So that would include immigrants, and in particular undocumented immigrants who have a hard time gaining access to federal programs.
Thank you. I have another question for Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez. The number of Californians that are unable to pay their mortgage or rent, like we've been talking here, it's going up. It's just skyrocketed with this pandemic. What long-term policy solutions are being considered in Sacramento? And are there any programs that you would like to share with our audience?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dunia. I also just want to take an opportunity to share that in response to COVID-19, the state has created a website, covid19.gov.com. It's a website that contains, it's covid19.ca.gov. And it's a website that has a lot of resources by categories. So for some of the questions regarding supports for nonprofits or supports for small businesses, I highly encourage viewers, to visit that website. I think it's a great resource. With regard to the question about, what are some of our policy and programmatic priorities to address, housing, there are several budget proposals. The governor released his May revision to the budget a few weeks ago that included, I'll just, I'll just share, three critical areas of focus. One is, I mentioned the importance of continuing to produce more affordable housing. And so the budget includes $500 million in state tax credits to provide support and funding for the construction of new affordable housing. This is a very important financing tool that is used in the creation of affordable housing. Secondly, the budget also includes about $300 million in assistance to provide financial counseling, homeowner assistance, financial literacy, really working with homeowners and renters who are struggling with staying housed. So that will lead to a number of services and programs made available to communities. And then finally, I do want to acknowledge that during this global health crisis and during this pandemic, the federal government has been allocating, thanks to Congress, significant dollars through the CARES Act to provide support for housing and support for vulnerable populations, specifically for homelessness programs. And so we are working towards utilizing the CARES Act funds that have come in to provide support to locals with creating permanent housing solutions. I'll just quickly mention, Dunia, I know that you want us to keep our remarks short, but I'll quickly mention that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor and the administration made addressing and really protecting vulnerable populations a key priority. And so across state agencies, we worked very closely to support local communities with specifically around homelessness, with identifying resources, technical assistance, guidance, and really helping to navigate through this public health crisis. That led to a number of efforts, and I want to acknowledge Assemblymember Limon and really the entire state legislature, because they gave the governor authority to expend up to $1 billion to provide emergency relief. And from the $1 billion, $100 million was carved out to our agency to provide direct homelessness funding support. That led to a number of efforts, including an initiative that we now call Project Room Key. Project Room Key is an effort to mitigate the public health impact on homeless populations by creating partnerships with hotels and motels to provide rooms and safe shelter for individuals experiencing homelessness. As we begin to, or as we continue really looking at the economic recovery and the transition, we're working very closely with counties and cities to develop a sustainable model for Project Room Key. And so the budget also includes about $600 million in CARES dollars or CARES funding to look at the sustainability of that effort and leading to creating permanent housing solutions.
Bless you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Well, the next question we have, it's coming from the audience, is Linda Garcia, whoever wants to answer can go and jump into this question. It's related to the previous one, but she wants to know if has there been any thoughts about rent control for commercial properties to keep rent low for small to start and grow, because the question is great. There's a lot of, like we were talking about, Latina-owned businesses, and they are suffering dramatically with this pandemic.
Yes, and I'm happy to jump in. We actually in the legislature have a few proposals, both for the tenant side, but also for the property owner side. On the tenant side, I know that Senator Scott Wiener has a proposal, and I don't know the name off the top, off the top of my head, but he has a Senate bill that's looking at commercial property, rent around commercial properties. I know that Assemblymember David Hsu from San Francisco has a bill related to tenant protections, as does Senator Lena Gonzalez. These bills approach how we protect tenants, how we give them more time to pay the rent, in what forms of, how is rent going to be accepted. All of that, these proposals address some of it on the residential and on the commercial side. Additionally, I'm carrying Assembly Bill 2501 that looks at how you give individuals more time to pay off their home loans, auto loans, and small dollar loans. So these are all conversations. Likely we won't see this legislation go through until August. And I think that right now, all these pieces of legislation serve as a form of having substantive conversations about these particular issues. But please know that there are bills that are going through the process. We're trying to vet them in significant ways with our colleagues around the state to see what will become law. These are all being put in place to address the emergency. We don't have an end date for the emergency, but they are being put in place to address the emergency. We just saw a bill related to rent control around mobile parks that just passed the Assembly and is headed to the Senate as well. And lastly, we have our California Judicial Council that has helped us with some guidelines around tenant evictions specifically. And they put some of that in place in the month of March or April, and that continues to be in place. So there's different entities in all branches of government, right? The legislative, judicial, and executive who are continuously working on this. So please look out for them, and always feel free to reach out if you want the specific number, the specific name of the bill, either the Senate bill or the Assembly bill that addresses some of these, so that you can get more information about it.
Thank you, Assembly Member. This also answers Jenny Rivera, who wanted to know if a rent regulation and what people earn here in California is not enough, and what services are there. So you pretty much answer her too. Thank you, Jenny, for sending that question. I have the next question will be, we have Latinas from all over California listening today. Okay, so I want you, each one of you, to share, are there any policy solutions that you are advocating for that we should be made aware of to address the current and future workforce needs? Let's start with this one, and all of you can give us your point of view in 1 to 1 minute and a half.
I'm happy to start. The legislature is considering, the workforce opportunities. We touched on a topic actually on Wednesday of this week in the California Assembly, a topic related to contracting and contracting for minorities. Affirmative action. Prop 209 was repealed in California. That allowed some, consideration for minorities, including women-owner business. And as the vice chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus, I can tell you that the Women's Caucus has prioritized this bill. It is ACA 5. The author is Assemblymember Shirley Weber, and it would potentially allow for a voter initiative in November. So the legislature is not going to repeal or overturn the ban on affirmative action, but it would go to the voters in November. And why is this important? Because we continue to see that while there's over 2 million minority-owned women business owners in the state of California, when it about 1.1 billion is still left on the table, that doesn't go to women, small business owners. And so I think that those are some of the things that we're potentially looking at. They're complicated conversations, though. I don't pretend that what we're taking on is easy. I don't pretend that what we're taking on doesn't bring a lot of feelings to the table. But I think that what you're seeing in a time of crisis, we're tackling among the hardest issues. Where are state business contracts going? How do they impact minorities and women across the state of California? And what policy changes would need to potentially happen? But that's one example of one of them.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to make a comment on that, or we go to the next question?
I'll mention a couple of things. I actually realized there's a couple of existing programs that are not well known. So one of them, there's something called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. I mentioned this earlier, but it is part of the Federal CARES Act, and it's a benefit for people who are self-employed as well as people who are independent contractors to be able to get unemployment insurance-like benefits. And so there are some complex interactions between that and PPP. So if you are a business owner that has PPP, there will be some offset. But I really want to make sure that everyone knows about this PUA program. And the way you apply for it is to go to the EDD-UI website and certify if you were unemployed or had reduced hours due to COVID-19. And the benefits could go back as far back to February 2nd of 2020. The other is a program called WorkShare. And this is also something that was utilized so little throughout history, including during the last recession. But this is where an employer, it's usually thought of as a layoff aversion program so that you can keep your employees on the payroll and pay them reduced salaries. So let's say they're working, it has to be between 10 to 60% of their normal hours and their normal pay. And then, but they can get paid for the 10 to 60% and then still get unemployment insurance. So that is really, it's thought of as layoff aversion, but I think of it as a reemployment program now during reopening. And I also think of it as a poverty aversion program, right? Just the benefits alone are often not enough. That's partly why we see all these other issues that we're talking about here, including housing insecurity. But it is a program that employers apply for, and then their employees apply for unemployment insurance through that program. So it's two things that already exist. I'll say one last thing just about, kind of what other policies there are. The administration has been working really hard for some time now, but the pandemic really forces us to renew our energy and commitment, which is, I think this is shocking to a lot of people, but throughout California, over 50% of workers, it doesn't matter if you are in an urban or rural area, inland or coastal, over 50% make less than $15 an hour. And Latinos and African Americans are disproportionately represented in that under $15 an hour hourly wage. So it then becomes safe to say that the average California worker is a low-wage worker of color. So all of these other things we're talking about really, this was said at the very beginning, right? Jobs are so key to an individual, a family, and a community's economic security. And of course, jobs have never been just about salary and income, right? It's also about meaning and impact and dignity. And so focusing on how we uplift jobs and then open up more pathways for people who face barriers to employment to get into those good jobs is really key to the economic recovery. It's a big focus for the administration. It's a focus for the governor's task force on business and jobs recovery. And I think we have to get out of the mindset that somehow some jobs are inevitably going to be low wage. There's no reason why that has to be the case. So our policies want to marry the interests of workers and of small businesses who want to do right by their workers, but don't always have that profit margin. That is really a big part of the focus of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency.
Thank you, Secretary. So now that you mentioned the task force, for the people that don't know, the Governor Newsom created a task force to develop actions for government and businesses to help California recover as fast as safely possible from this COVID-19. For those of you that are members of the governor's task force, and I want to start with Elaine, in 2 sentences, can you talk about the task force and its goals, priorities, and your subcommittee's priorities as well?
Sure. So the task force is a group of over 100 individuals. Both the secretaries sit on the task force as well. And really it's a nonpartisan group of business, private sector, public sector, a variety of all employers that are really focused on addressing the health issues with COVID, but more importantly, developing a path for economic recovery that really meets the needs of everyone. And there is a focus on the disadvantaged, just because of the lack of voice, and as someone said in the comments, many times they get left behind. In terms of priorities, I know because there's so many folks, I won't say too much on this, but it's about reopening up the economy safely and making sure the messaging and guidance is there. It's scaling up testing and tracing, which is important to really understand your hot spots. And as we saw early on, the healthcare workers and the healthcare institutions were just overly burdened. And so just really having some more intelligence in terms of hotspots and just general affordability of testing and access to testing. It's child care and opening up schools safely. That's a big one. Keeping education safe is huge. And so that's obviously a focus. It's capital, as we discussed before, that's made available to businesses. It's apprenticeship and the creation of new jobs. You don't hear that word a lot, but now it's back, and a lot of people are talking about it, which I think is great. And then the other piece of it that I think is important is the federal funding. I think Secretary Castro Ramirez mentioned it, but without federal help to the states, there are going to be a lot of public services that are going to suffer, including first responders. And so we continue as a task force to advocate for the federal dollars to come into the states so that it could be used for maintaining those services.
Thank you. Now, Secretary Castro Ramirez, what is your subcommittee's immediate priorities, and what do you see in the first step towards economic and workforce recovery?
Yes, thank you, Dunia. I want to build on the point that Secretary Sue shared earlier, then connected back to the subcommittee's work. I think the data that she just shared, that reminded us of the reality that 50% of workers are earning less than $15 an hour. The connection there back to housing and housing affordability. We have to be very intentional when we talk about housing affordability. We need to be very intentional in defining what we mean and ensuring that we are creating housing that is affordable where the greatest need is. And so that is, an ongoing policy discussion and an important piece of the economic recovery. And then, secondly, within the subcommittee, as Elaine mentioned, the overall goal of the task force is to work in partnership with public and private and philanthropic leaders, to develop a comprehensive approach. A comprehensive approach, to a safe reopening and an equitable economic recovery. The subcommittee that I serve on is the Capital Markets and Infrastructure Subcommittee, and we're focused on addressing the affordable housing, transportation, and other infrastructure needs that are important in, as I mentioned, this equitable recovery. I want to share that a framework that we are beginning to use is a framework that is not just focused on funding and programs, but it's one that starts with thinking about people, and so that means understanding where is the greatest need. Secondly, understanding how do we also focus as we discuss supporting affordable housing production. What does that mean in terms of creating job opportunities? What does that mean? Elaine mentioned apprenticeship programs. Can we be more focused and intentional in terms of partnering to create apprenticeship programs, to create programs that enable individuals to enter into this sector and to benefit from the opportunities to build housing? And so I'm very excited, with the co-chairs that are leading this effort and with the members of the committee. And I think that this, pandemic really has demonstrated that these problems that we're discussing, from the economy to the, social challenges that many women and many people in our communities face, the housing challenges, they can't be tackled alone. You can't just address housing as a housing professional. You really have to work across sectors. And I very much appreciate the fact that that's exactly the platform that HOPE has created today, the interconnectedness of these issues and working together. This is how we're going to be able to solve for these issues and really, I think that improve the overall quality of life for all Californians.
Thank you very much. Earlier in the discussion, we were talking about numbers. Assemblymember Monique Limon was talking about the unemployment rate. I have some information here. According to the California Center for Jobs and the Economy, the state's unemployment rate has slipped to 15.5%. This is like 3 times from mid-March and mid-April. And like Secretary Su mentioned before, also job losses are a result of COVID-19 are impacting more industries, the lower wage industries than the other ones. So we have a couple of questions from the public. I want to read some of them because we don't have that much time and we want to cover some of them. Let's see who we find here. Angela Grijalba, she wants to know, how will community members be available themselves of these protections, avail themselves from these protections? Who will enforce these proposed laws on the front lines? I don't know exactly what's that question about. I'm sorry, I didn't bring my glasses. I can hardly see these letters. Let me see. I had another question from a person here that she's asking about the younger community. What are the services for the younger community? She says the youngsters are our future. What can you give as a, let's give that mainly as an advice for the Latinas that are listening to us, they're younger Latinas, because you are the role models. You guys are the ones that will open the path for them. And if you could give them an activation that could take to help California's situation, what will be this, especially for the younger communities?
Can I try to answer the prior question and I'll
Sure.
this one and then turn it over to the amazing other panelists. So this question about enforcement is a really important one, right? I'm sure that Assemblymember Limon would say the same thing, like the laws are only as good as our ability to actually make them meaningful and real in the lives of Californians. And so on the, in the governor's administration, our job is to do enforcement. And on the labor law side, that falls into departments under the labor agency. And so part of our job in enforcement is to do outreach and to make sure that the outreach is reaching the most vulnerable workers and their employers so people understand what their rights and responsibilities are. And we've been really active about thinking through and implementing more innovative outreach strategies. But it's also about working directly with workers and community-based organizations who have the trust of workers to speak out about abuses, right? There's part of the problem about enforcement is if workers are too afraid to speak out, then, or they feel like they have to endure violations as the price of economic security, then we have a problem with making the laws meaningful and real. And so when I was California Labor Commissioner before this, and now the Labor Commissioner is another powerful and amazing Latina, Lilia Garcia Brower, we focused a lot on trying to be strategic in our enforcement, because the other part of enforcement is that government is not going to be able to enforce in every single workplace. And so one of our focus areas is on creating strong employer-employee partnerships to make sure there's enforcement and to make sure there's a worker voice in enforcement. And that's one of our goals as we think through what the economic recovery is going to look like, right? There's no time has it been more true that worker safety and public safety are closely aligned. So how do we make sure that workers can work with employers to ensure that the safety guidelines about reopening are being enforced? I will say one thing about young people. So this is actually a really scary statistic, but the number of young people who have filed for unemployment insurance in the last 3 months is way higher than the proportion of their population. And that's claimants from the age of 16 to 23. So they're experiencing unemployment at a relatively high rate. And as many, this has been really well documented, is that youth who enter the labor market at a time of economic recession not only face a harder time, lower wages in the time period they enter, but it could be a lifelong depression of earnings. So this is one of our biggest priorities. One of the subcommittees and the task force that I co-chair is called economic equity. And so youth are a big priority for all of us in the administration, but definitely as a matter of equity. So the one thing I'll say to be concrete is that there are jobs at the state. The state is still hiring. There are jobs that you can do to come in to help enforce those labor laws, especially if you are bilingual and bicultural. I have always thought that it's so important to open up state service to people who have lived experiences for the communities that we want to reach and whose trust we want to gain. And so one path is to look for those state jobs where you can come in and really make an impact, and it's a quality job where you can also build a career.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Add something about the youth, please. I think that right now the youth are looking, and I'm talking about the young population. They're looking at, and they've never been into grocery stores and not seen food in some cases, or they've had to wear masks or think about personal protection. And so what you've seen is some beautiful stories emerge throughout the state in terms of kids just responding to compassion and filling a void. I think there's assumption that someone is going to solve all of these COVID problems, and it's the administration. And even with so many people working so hard, there's just some problems that exist that I think we need to work with our youth to say, hey, if you want to go to a food bank, volunteer. If you can help navigate donations, there's always someone worse off. This is an opportunity to help our youth develop their compassion and social justice and ability to help others. And I think that there's opportunity sometimes in dark times. And I know that's something I'm really doing with my children, and making them see, that go to food banks and understand what food banks are and how we can always contribute in a positive way in a hard situation.
Thank you. Assemblymember Limon?
Well, and I would say, in the last 3 weeks, actually, we've seen our youth rise up all over this country, particularly around issues of injustice, racism, sexism. And I think that for us as lawmakers, we are watching our youth not stay silent and raise their voices in a peaceful way, where we're paying attention, we're listening. We're very clear that they are asking that lawmakers, that public officials, that organizations, that businesses all come together to create a different future. And I think it's been one of the most powerful things that I've seen in a very long time. When you look at a lot of the protests that have happened around the world, not even the country, it's the world in the last few weeks around racism, injustice, you see the youth come forward. I know that was the case definitely with issues related to climate change. And so we're also seeing different moments in time where youth are speaking up. I am very clear that one day that I will not be a lawmaker. And it is this youth, this body of youth that will take the roles that we have and be the leaders. And certainly I think they're being exposed not just to how we form ideals, but also how complicated it is to think about all of the issues in front of us. I think that the crisis we're living, the health, social, and economic crisis, are putting a lot of very hard issues in front of us. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make a lot of things go away, but truly it is this ability to have dialogue, to raise questions, that is going to get us there. So I think that my piece of advice to the youth is to continue to be the voices you are, realize that it takes time, to be able to do it, but certainly there's a momentum to try to be able to do more. So I'm appreciative of that. And we will keep listening and hearing the voices of our youth.
Thank you. We have 2 more minutes. I have one question from the audience. Jacqueline Avina. Recent college graduates are now confronting an unstable workforce with limited job opportunities, how will these graduates be able to navigate paying off their government loans with so limited employment opportunities? Are there any current legislative proposals to aid these students?
Yeah, go ahead. No, Secretary, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, and this is also sort of a call to action for young people. There is a fifth stimulus package that has been introduced that I think is very important that we all become aware of, especially in light of the conversations that we have had about renters and homeowners and the need for ensuring that families are able to stay housed. And this particular package is called the HEROES Act, and it also includes funding, recognizing that a number of students will have a very difficult time paying their loans, and so there is funding that is included to be able to provide additional resources and relief for students, as it relates to student loans. But specifically, the package would include rental assistance for individuals and families that are unable to pay their rent. It calls for about $75 billion in homeowner assistance for individuals that are not able to meet their mortgage payments. And it also provides additional funding for homelessness programming and services. And so I would just, invite our youth to make a call to their senator and it is, for additional federal resources to be made available to cities and to, states, so that we are able to do everything possible to provide the support necessary to ensure housing stability, economic stability, and social stability.
Okay, thank you very much. The time went by super fast. I have pretty much one more minute. All I have to say is this conversation of California's present and future workforce, Latina Action Days is wonderful. This was a 3-day series, and we cover a lot of the questions that we were receiving in this portal. And I want to just say thank you to all of you for your time. It's been a pleasure for me to be here. I'm humbled to be the moderator of this wonderful conversation on behalf of Telemundo 52. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to explore in this topic. And I hope that we can guide a lot of the Latinas, not only the Latinas or moms there, but our younger community that really can benefit from hope and all the services that you guys are providing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dunia, and thank you to our panelists. I want to make sure that we all give them a big hand reaction on our screens if you can, or through the chat. A big thank you to Assemblymember Limon, Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez, Secretary Julie Sue, and Elaine Trevino. Thank you all for your representation of women's issues, our women voices, and from the perspective that you all shared. It was an incredible panel. We have so many resources that we will be posting because of this panel. Thank goodness we have a great team at Hope that will be have been taking great notes. We've been trying to post as many of the websites that you made references to and some of the bills as well on the chat, but we'll be following up as an organization on that. So thank you all, and thank you again, Dunia, for all your leadership and your great moderation of this panel. Thank you, everyone. As we start wrapping up Latina Action Day, let's give a besos to everyone. Thank you. As we start wrapping up Latina Action Day, there's a couple of things I want to ensure. Three major action items that there was a lot of places to get information, but I want to share some. Remember to advocate for the HEROES Act. It's important to advocate for the HEROES Act. Also, I think that we have a little bit of technical difficulty there. So I was saying, please advocate for the HEROES Act. We will be posting the letter HOPE sent in to our 2 U.S. senators Feinstein and Harris. You can use that as a template. That's important to ensure that there's continual federal funding coming to California during this critical pandemic. Also, make sure to remember to register to vote and vote. We have an important critical election in November. And lastly, make sure to take part in the census. If you've already filled out your census form, make sure that your friends and your family members have too. This is an incredible time for leadership to stand up, and we have been seeing incredible examples from our youth. As adults, let's make sure we're following their example and that we show them the necessity and the importance of voting, filling out our census, and advocating for our state at the U.S. Senate level. I also like to thank all the session sponsors, Marathon for this specific, being our specific session sponsor today, for Chevron for being a sponsor and title sponsor for the 3 days, our strategic sponsors, the California Resource Corporation, Comcast, NBC, Universal, Telemundo Enterprise, Southwest Airlines, Wells Fargo, AT&T, Spectrum, Kaiser Permanente, and Valero. Those were the top sponsors. We had plenty of other sponsors like Starbucks, American Chemistry Association, and so many more like Planned Parenthood. Please take a look at our sponsor reel and send them a thank you. And a big thank you, of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have been a great supporter of Hope, and the California Endowment. Lastly, not quite lastly, to our community affiliates. We heard of Latina leaders from Kern County, the Latina Coalition for Silicon Valley. There's so many of you, and we're so grateful for you to partner with Hope in shaping this programming and ensuring it was a resource to all your constituents. This has been an incredible 3 days. I'm very proud, and I think the team knows how much we value their work. To the Hope team and to all of you who have been participating in these 3 days, we're very grateful. The pandemic has taken a toll on all nonprofits, and for us to be able to pivot and to ensure that Latina voices are strong during this time, with your encouragement and of course the great work of the Hope team, we're very grateful. I also wanted to highlight our board members, Lenice Gutierrez, Rosie Arroyo, Lupita Sanchez Conejo, Nora Dominguez, Elizabeth Atley, Laura Arcianiga, Nicolina Hernandez, Vanessa Canilla, Evelyn Martinez, and Erica Cabrera for their steady support of our organization during this critical time. Hopefully next year, we will not only be digitally together in this virtual reality, but hopefully gathering in Sacramento and ensuring all our legislators and the administration hear our voices loud and clear. We at Hope will continue to be a strong voice for Latinas. We will be active in the Black Lives Matter movement. Please stay tuned for all the Hope programming that we will be creating, especially our series at Hope at Home series. And if you want to learn more about us, friend us on Facebook, go at Let Hope Latina so you can follow us. And thank you all. And once again, a big heartfelt thank you to our panelists, to our sponsors, to our Hope board members, and a big thank you to Noelia Sanchez for Noteworthy Lab, who helped us put this all together. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everyone. May God bless you all and have a fantastic weekend. Be safe. Wear those masks.
Yeah.